God establishes specific times for starting the year, and they're not in January. In ancient Jerusalem, the new year was announced with the powerful blast of ram's horns. And in Rome, an emperor's calendar reform would change how the entire world marks time. This isn't just a story about changing dates. It's about how two great civilizations understood time itself, how they celebrated new beginnings, and how their ancient decisions created the New Year's celebration we know today. First truth: God's calendar. The first element of our story is God's calendar. The Bible tells us something remarkable about when the year should begin. In Exodus, just before the Israelites leave Egypt, God speaks to Moses and Aaron. "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you." With these words, God established not just a calendar, but a new way of understanding time itself. Before this moment, the Israelites had lived under Egyptian time. Egypt's calendar was built around the flooding of the Nile, which brought life, giving water to the desert. But God was about to give His people a completely different way of marking time, one that would remind them of their journey from slavery to freedom. This divine calendar didn't begin in winter like ours. God chose spring, when nature awakens and new life emerges, as the starting point of the year. This wasn't a random choice. The Israelites were about to experience their own awakening, their own new beginning, as they left slavery in Egypt and became a free people. Every spring, as they watched flowers bloom and trees bud, they would remember how God had given them a fresh start. The timing was perfect. In the land of Israel, spring marked the beginning of the barley harvest. The first crops would start to ripen, and farmers would begin their most important work of the year. The natural cycle of planting and harvesting aligned perfectly with this spiritual new beginning. This spring new year became known as the religious new year because it determined when all the major festivals would be celebrated. But here's where it gets interesting. This spring new year wasn't the only way ancient Israel marked time. In Leviticus, we find instructions for another celebration. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with blast of trumpets. This 7th month, which falls in our September-October, became a second New Year celebration in the ancient Jewish calendar. These trumpet blasts, made with a ram's horn called a shofar, would echo through the hills of Jerusalem. Imagine standing in the ancient city as these powerful sounds filled the air. The shofar wasn't just noise. It was a call to attention, a reminder that something significant was happening. While the spring new year celebrated freedom and new beginnings, this autumn celebration was a time for reflection and remembrance. Think about how different this is from our modern calendar. Today, we mark the new year in the dead of winter, when nature is dormant. But in the ancient world, new beginnings were tied to agricultural cycles. The spring new year coincided with the barley harvest, the first major harvest of the year. This was a time of action and celebration as the first fruits of the earth were gathered. Fields that had laid dormant through winter suddenly burst with life and activity. This natural abundance perfectly matched the celebration of freedom. Just as the earth provided its first harvest, God had provided freedom to His people. The autumn new year, falling in September-October, marked the end of the agricultural cycle. The summer fruits and grapes had been harvested, the final crops were in, and the heavy work of the year was complete. This was naturally a time to count your blessings, assess what the year had brought, and prepare for the winter ahead. The blast of the shofar called people to take stock of their lives, just as farmers took stock of their harvests. So these two new years weren't just arbitrary dates. They marked crucial points in the agricultural cycle that sustained life. The spring celebration came with the first harvest, full of promise and potential. The autumn celebration came after all the harvests were complete, a natural time for reflection and planning. Second truth: the Roman Revolution. While God established His calendar in spring, our story takes us to Rome, where everything was about to change. In 2046 BC, Julius Caesar faced a serious problem. The Roman calendar was in chaos. The old Roman calendar started in March and had only 10 months, followed by an unorganized winter period. This created endless confusion. Imagine trying to plan a harvest festival, but finding it falls in the wrong season because the calendar had drifted so far from reality. Even worse, corrupt politicians would add or remove days to extend their time in office or make their opponents' terms shorter. Caesar, determined to solve this chaos, brought in astronomers from Egypt, home to one of the most accurate calendar systems of the ancient world. After careful study, he ordered a complete reform. First, he added 90 days to the year 2046 BC to get the seasons back in alignment. Imagine a year with 445 days. Then he created what we now call the Julian calendar. Here were the major changes. Added January and February as full months, set the year at 365 days, created the leap year system, adding an extra day every 4 years. Most importantly for our story, made January 1st the official start of the year. Why January 1st? The answer lies in Roman politics. This was when new consuls took office. Imagine it like a presidential inauguration day. The date had nothing to do with astronomy, harvests, or religious significance. It was purely administrative, chosen because that's when Rome's political terms already started. As Rome's power grew, this calendar spread across their vast empire. From Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria, the Roman system became the standard for official business. Local peoples might keep their traditional calendars for religious festivals and harvests, but for taxes, contracts, and government affairs, everyone had to use Rome's calendar. The Romans didn't just change when the year started. They changed how people thought about marking time. Instead of following natural cycles of harvest or religious events, they created a system based on administrative convenience. This shift from natural cycles to political necessity created a tension that would shape history. The clash between Rome's calendar and the traditional ways people had always marked time. But the Julian calendar wasn't perfect. It gained about 11 minutes every year because it assumed the year was exactly 365.25 days long. By the 1500s, this small error had accumulated to 10 days, causing serious problems for determining religious feast days, especially Easter. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII addressed this issue. He removed 10 days from October. People went to sleep on October 4 and woke up on October 15 and introduced a new rule for leap years. Century years, like 1700, 1800, 1900, would only be leap years if they were divisible by 400. This made the calendar much more accurate. This new Gregorian calendar is what we use today. However, its adoption wasn't immediate. Protestant countries were initially reluctant to accept a Catholic reform. Britain and its colonies didn't adopt it until 1752. Russia waited until after the Revolution in 1918. This explains why the Russian Orthodox Church celebrates Christmas on January 7th. They're still following the Julian calendar for religious observances. Third truth, the God behind January. With the Roman calendar now established, our story brings us face to face with one of history's most unique deities, Janus, the god behind January. Unlike any other god in ancient Rome, or perhaps in any religion, Janus was depicted with two faces, one looking back to the past, one gazing into the future. Janus wasn't just another deity in Rome's crowded pantheon. His temple in the Roman Forum held a special significance. It contained doors, known as the Gates of Janus, that served as a powerful symbol of war and peace. These gates would remain open during times of war, allowing the god to help the soldiers heading to battle, and would be closed in times of peace. During Rome's entire history, these gates were closed only 3 times, a testament to how rarely the empire knew true peace. As the guardian of transitions, Janus presided over all beginnings and endings. Romans would invoke him at the start of each day, month, and year. He watched over doorways, gateways, and transitions of all kinds. Even the word janitor comes from Janus, originally meaning a doorkeeper or gatekeeper. The choice of Janus for the first month reveals how Romans viewed the new year as a doorway between past and future. His double-faced image perfectly captured this moment of transition. One face reflecting on the year that had passed, one face looking forward to the year ahead. This concept was so powerful that it survives in how we approach New Year today, reflecting on our past year while making resolutions for the future. In the Roman world, January 1st wasn't just the start of the year. It was Janus's special day. People would exchange gifts for good luck, particularly sweet things like dates and figs, hoping to make the coming year sweet. They would watch for omens and make promises for the year ahead. Most importantly, they would ensure that any action taken on this day was positive, believing it would set the tone for the entire year. The influence of Janus and his traditions extends far beyond ancient Rome. Even after Christianity became the dominant religion of Europe, traces of Janus remained in how people marked the new year. Consider the tradition of making New Year's resolutions. In Roman times, people would make promises to Janus on January 1st, believing that his two faces would watch over their commitments. While we no longer dedicate our promises to a two-faced god, the tradition of making commitments at the start of the year continues. The Roman practice of giving gifts for good luck transformed over time, but didn't disappear. In medieval Europe, January 1st became known as the Day of Presents. Even today, in many cultures, it's considered important to give and receive gifts in the first days of the year. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Janus is how we think about this moment of transition. Like the two-faced god, we stand at midnight on December 31st, simultaneously looking backward and forward. We review the old year while planning for the new one. We close one door while opening another. Even the traditional Roman concern about doing something positive on January 1st survives in modern superstitions. In many cultures, people believe that what you do on New Year's Day influences your entire year. Some avoid cleaning house, thinking it might sweep away your luck. Others make sure to wear new clothes or eat special foods for good fortune. The Temple of Janus in Rome may be long gone, but we still pass through his symbolic doorway every December 31st. We might not worship the two-faced god anymore, but we still mark time the way Romans did over 2,000 years ago, standing in that space between past and future, between what was and what might be. Fourth truth: when Christians faced a choice, as Christianity began spreading across the Roman Empire, our story reaches a crucial turning point in how people celebrated the new year. The followers of this new faith faced a serious dilemma. Should they follow the Roman New Year on January 1st, with its deep connections to Janus, or reject it as a pagan celebration? This wasn't just about choosing a date. It was about choosing between old traditions and new faith. The January 1st celebrations in Rome looked different from our modern New Year's parties, but shared some surprising similarities. In Rome, streets would fill with drunken revelry, people would dress up in costumes, and homes would be decorated with lights and greenery. Most troublingly for Christian leaders, these celebrations included sacrifices to Janus and fortune-telling rituals for the year ahead. Looking at our modern celebrations, we might be surprised by how much they resemble these ancient Roman festivities. Just like the Romans, we still fill our streets with revelry, decorate our homes with lights, and gather for festive celebrations. Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential Christian teachers of the 5th century, strongly condemned these celebrations. In his sermons, he described how some Christians would participate in the New Year festivities during the day, then come to church in the evening. How can you drink from the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons? He would ask his congregation, quoting from Scripture. But church leaders faced a practical problem. Simply telling people to stop celebrating New Year's Day wasn't working. These festivities were deeply embedded in Roman society. Imagine trying to tell people today to stop celebrating New Year's. The Roman calendar governed everyday life, from paying rent to planning harvests. The solution that emerged was both practical and profound. Instead of trying to abolish January 1st celebrations, the church gradually transformed them. They established January 1st as the feast of the circumcision of Christ, as written in the Gospel of Luke. On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise the child, he was named Jesus. This connected January 1st directly to the story of Jesus, as it falls 8 days after December 25th, the celebration of his birth. This wasn't the only change. The practice of giving gifts at New Year, which began with the Romans, was reframed as following the example of the Magi bringing gifts to Jesus. The lights and greenery used to honor Janus became symbols of Christ as the light of the world. Even the theme of new beginnings was reinterpreted, no longer about fortune-telling and predictions, but about spiritual renewal. This transformation shows us something fascinating about how cultures change. Rather than completely rejecting or accepting Roman customs, early Christians found a middle way, keeping the celebrations while changing their meaning. It's a pattern we see repeated throughout history. Old customs don't disappear, they transform. Fifth truth: the world's many new years. As our story comes to the present day, we discover a remarkable truth. While January 1st has become the global standard for New Year, many ancient traditions continue to thrive alongside it. Each of these celebrations tells us something unique about how different cultures mark new beginnings. Chinese New Year, falling between January 21 and February 20, follows lunar cycles and brings the world's largest annual migration, as billions of people travel home for family reunions. The celebration spans 15 days, each with its own traditions and significance. The Islamic New Year, or Hijri New Year, moves through the seasons as it follows a purely lunar calendar. Unlike most New Year's celebrations, it's often marked with quiet reflection rather than elaborate festivities, commemorating the Prophet Muhammad's journey from Mecca to Medina. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, continues the ancient autumn celebration we discussed earlier. The shofar still sounds in synagogues worldwide, carrying forward a tradition from biblical times. Nowruz, the Persian New Year, occurs at the spring equinox, similar to the biblical first month. This ancient celebration includes rituals of purification and renewal that predate even the Persian Empire. These diverse celebrations show us that while Rome's calendar won the administrative battle, it never completely erased older ways of marking time. In fact, today's world seems comfortable holding multiple calendars at once. We might celebrate January 1st while also observing our culture's traditional New Year. This multiplicity of New Years isn't a contradiction. It's a reflection of human civilization's rich cultural heritage. Each celebration, whether ancient or modern, adds its own unique perspective to how we mark the passage of time. From God's calendar to Roman reforms, from Janus's temple to Christian changes, we've uncovered the forgotten history of how January 1st became New Year's Day. If you want to discover more hidden histories and biblical revelations like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might be as fascinated as you are by these ancient stories that shaped our world today.